Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today we are talking about why Alabama football players are fleeing the football program after Nick Saban retires and Kalen DeBoer has been hired as the new Alabama head coach. We'll go ahead and talk about this here today. We will basically kind of go over the guys that have left, and we'll kind of talk about if this is a big deal or if it's being overstated a little bit. So I'll go ahead here right now. We're going to go to On3's website right now, and we're going to go look at these are mostly Alabama's activity in the transfer portal. And as you can see, a lot. We're not going to go through all these guys. We're basically just going to kind of do a little bit of a counting game here. Caleb Downs, this five-star freshman safety, he's a guy that is considered a very, very big loss. Julian Sayin is the most recent one to enter the portal. He's a five-star freshman quarterback that actually was a part of the 2024 class. I believe he just enrolled at Alabama, and now he's already entered the transfer portal right away since you know after enrolling in Alabama. So that's kind of an interesting kind of story that's broken out here too. But we'll just go ahead and kind of count these guys. Another player that went committed to Texas that I think was a very good player for Alabama last year is Isaiah Bond. He is on this list too. So we'll just go ahead and count all of these guys basically since Nick Saban left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a player transferring from Washington to Alabama, by the way. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. I believe that's that same guy, by the way. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. 24 guys since Nick Saban has left that played at Alabama last year have basically left and have committed to other schools, or they are still in the transfer portal awaiting to go to a different school. Now, you say that here, and the reason I brought that up, and if Alabama fans haven't already tuned out me here, trust me, you're going to want to stay because I'm on your side with this stuff, guys. The reason I'm bringing this up is a lot of people have kind of done the list of the amount of Alabama players that left for the transfer portal and put it in a tweet. And kind of when you see that stuff out loud, you're like, oh my God, 27 guys have entered the transfer portal for Alabama. That's not necessarily a good headline. Now, I'm going to show you an article here in a second that kind of explains that a little bit more deeply. Now, to kind of back that up before I even get into the article, when you say that 27 Alabama players have entered the transfer portal, it hasn't all been in the last 10 days. And that's the reason I went through that stuff. All those guys that committed, they just committed in the last 10 days. Because we're recording this too, by the way, it's Saturday afternoon. So January 20th, the afternoon portion of that day. So if anything happens after that, because we're probably not going to post this one until Sunday or Monday. If anything changes after that, that's just timestamp right now. It's 2:00 Saturday afternoon, January 20th. So that's just a little bit of a timestamp there. So I'll go ahead and just kind of show you this article here. It is an Alabama article. Now, there's sometimes too, guys, and this is kind of my philosophy when it comes to talking about, as someone that's interviewed a lot of people that cover college football, you have to be kind of picky and choosy of when you want to listen to the local fan base and you want to listen to that stuff. Because I think sometimes you can listen to them and a lot of times you can hear kind of the same repetitive stuff. Because a lot of times you ask people okay, why did your head coach get fired? It's like, oh, well, he lost a few games, the record was going down, and then he was starting to lose recruits. And when he was losing the recruits, that's when we canned him. And then it's like when guys are hired, you're like, okay, what do you really like about this guy? It's like, well, he's changing the culture, and he's it's always the same answer. And he's really hitting the recruiting trail hard. And it's always little stuff like that. And it's honestly just kind of funny after a while, because it's just like when I've started doing interviews, I've stopped asking those questions because I'm like, oh, I've gotten the same answer 8 different times from 8 different schools. So we all kind of have these sayings that we say. And again, it's just fandom. It's just how we do it. We do it at every school. So let's just go ahead and get to this article here, because I think when we're talking about this transfer portal story, I think this is one of those things where we actually should listen to maybe the local people at Alabama and how it's actually, being perceived on something like Twitter, and actually how it's being done in real time and in Tuscaloosa. So this is an article here. Again, it's from an Alabama website. I'm sorry. Alabama football transfer portal max exodus is being overstated. Nicholas Rome, by the way, we'll credit him. for this article here. The recent sentiment across college football media is that the Alabama football program is suffering a mass exodus with players entering the transfer portal, with key players have entered the transfer portal like Caleb Downs, Caden Proctor, Isaiah Bond, Trey Amos, and Amari Niblack. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Among others, the idea that there's a max exodus with Nick Saban's departure isn't true. Okay. Taking a glance, you'd see that 28 players entered the transfer portal, which may seem like a large number, but you have to look at the dates on which players decided to transfer. Before Nick Saban's retirement, 20 players entered the transfer portal. That's basically what I was saying right there. Even though we went through that thing of the 20 players there, 20 of them had already, most of those guys had already been in the transfer portal before Saban even decided to retire. Most of the players who decided to transfer were either rotational players or players who hadn't seen playing time yet. Only 7 of the 28 players who entered the transfer portal would be categorized as starters or key returnees. 7 is a pretty big number on that, by the way. Seven is not a small number, especially when it comes to college football, especially when a lot of those guys were pretty young too. Guys like Isaiah Bond, guys like Caleb Downs. Despite a common media narrative, the number of 28 players deciding to transfer isn't a crazy number compared to other schools. Georgia Bulldogs didn't lose their head coach yet, but had 20 players enter the transfer or enter the portal. The same goes for Ohio State and their 19 transfers. Florida State lost 18 players when just looking at a few other top 10 teams. Not being talked about much are the players who decided to stay with Alabama football program. Jalen Milroe most immediately let it be known that he'd be sticking with the program, as did Malachi Moore, who could have easily entered the portal or the NFL draft, but chose to publicly support DeBoer. The same goes for players like Tyler Booker, Dante Lawson, and many others who have chosen to embrace the challenge of adapting to the new coaching staff. People who will also point to the recent decommitments, with Ryan Williams decommitting, as well as a few players in the 2025 class. In case of Williams, it's possible he could have flipped come signing day with Texas and Auburn continuing to push for the receiver. It's also possible Williams ends up in Tuscaloosa anyway, with an official visit still planned while he took an unofficial visit this past weekend. In theory, players in the 2025 class can be counted as departures, but in the modern era of college football, flipping is common. Players commit a year or two ahead of signing day, but nothing matters until the pen hits the paper. Flipmas, I think that's a term he's using here. Flipmas has become an early Flipmas like flip before Christmas. Yeah, okay, I got you. Sorry, I just hadn't. I was kind of trying to read really fast. Flipmas has become an early signing day commitment, with programs flipping some of the top recruits at the very last second. There's still nearly a year until players sign with a program, meaning Courtney Morgan and Kalen DeBoer can easily convince players to rejoin the 2025 recruiting class. So there you have it, guys. That's basically a summary of kind of describes all that stuff too. And I'm really glad too that they pointed out there that the transfer now again, they still do have a significantly larger transfer portal pool because Kalen DeBoer came in. But they also too, I think another part of this too is when he comes to Alabama, he brings players with him. Like we saw there on that list that we're showing earlier, he brought a young quarterback with him. There's probably a few other Washington guys that might actually come too. There might be a few guys from other schools that might actually come too. And again, Alabama still, even with some of these guys leaving, still has one of the top 5 to 8 most talented teams in the country, without a doubt. The scary thing about some of those guys leaving, though, is that some of those guys are going to Ohio State. Some of those guys are going to Texas. I think one of them went to Auburn. And those are guys that at least Texas, Auburn, and potentially Ohio State in a playoff are teams that you're going to directly be competing against. And, you know, it's one thing to lose the guys, but it's another thing to lose those guys and then have them go to other teams and have those other teams get stronger. So I kind of want to talk about the Kalen DeBoer hire a little bit here, because I thought it was a good hire, but I still think there are a lot of question marks to it. I'll get to what I like about the hire first, and then I'll get to where I have a lot of question marks with it. One, I like the hire because Kalen DeBoer has just proven at Washington that he is a good football coach. He's been able to game plan. He's been able to strategize. He's been able to, find talent, bring talent with him from Indiana and Fresno State to Washington. He's been able to bring good coaches in to coach under him. He's been able to develop talent while they were at Washington, because I was listening to I wasn't listening to him, but I was reading a tweet kind of saying like, about Washington, where it was like, hey, a lot of these guys that are going to the NFL draft from Washington weren't guys that like Kalen DeBoer like recruited and brought there. A lot of them were guys that were already with the program. So you could say, well, I mean, it's Kalen DeBoer. Is he a good recruiter? Is he not a good recruiter? Um, but you could also say that like, oh, these guys, he developed them into first round picks. He developed Michael Penix into a first round pick. And if you could develop Michael Penix into a first round pick, what could he do with a 4-star Alabama quarterback? What could you do with a 5-star Alabama quarterback that would come in? He's just a very good football coach. He knows how to game plan. And here's the thing, too, guys. He just knows how to win games. He knows how to coach. He's a good game manager. That's why, like, I think he would actually would have been and maybe he will one day be a very good NFL coach, just because he knows kind of that game management structure of that kind of stuff. I think he'd be very good at that. This is where I'm concerned about the Kalen DeBoer hire, and this is where the transfer portal stuff does start to become a little bit more concerning. I don't know how good of a recruiter he is. And yes, he's shown success as a head coach, but he hasn't necessarily been a head coach that long. He was only at Washington 2 years. And that would concern me a little bit if I was Alabama and I was an Alabama fan. Because if you're going to be in the SEC, more so, obviously recruiting is important everywhere. But if you're going to be in the SEC, in that conference, the most important thing you have to be as a head coach is be a recruiter. You obviously have to be, a good game manager. You have to develop the talent, obviously. I'm not saying that isn't important. We saw that with Jimbo, how he got a bunch of talent to Texas A&M, but they weren't able to do it on the football field. But step number one in the SEC is get the talent in the building. And that's going to be the biggest concern here with Alabama, where if DeBoer isn't as good of a recruiter as Nick Saban, where does that make Alabama fall year to year to year? And with that being said, too, if Alabama's just gonna have to be more comfortable with 9-3 and 10-2 seasons. Now, I'm not saying it's gonna happen every year under Kalen DeBoer, but I'd be shocked if in the next 5 years, if Kalen DeBoer spends all of those at Alabama, that they go 11-1 or 12-0 in the regular season every single year. I'd be absolutely shocked. And that's kind of your little bit of your concerns here with Kalen DeBoer and some of these guys entering the transfer portal. Is could you not recruit some of these guys back that would have stayed if Nick Saban was there, but instead left? That's your concern here with this story. So that's my concern with Kalen DeBoer. Everything else with him, I'm very certain of, but again, doesn't have much any SEC ties actually, and I'm not sure what kind of a recruiter he is. So if you're Alabama, that's my biggest concern. How good of a recruiter is this guy? And I guess we'll find out over the next few years if he gets that much of a shot. I don't know what kind of patience and rationality Alabama, the powers that be there, the boosters, the athletic department, the fans are going to have for him. Because if, say, next year they go 9-3, which would be the worst year Alabama's had in like 13, 14, maybe 15 years, I think. It might be longer than that. I'm sorry if I'm wrong on that date. But if they go 9-3, what's the expectation going to be for Alabama fans? They lose a 5-star recruit somewhere along the way. How soon does the cool water that Kalen DeBoer is swimming in right now, how soon does that heat up? How soon does that chair heat up? And that's going to be kind of the scary thing with Kalen DeBoer and if he can actually succeed at Alabama. So there you have it, guys. That's basically the story there. I think, that those tweets that I saw, and that's basically the reason I saw like a thing where it's like 20 Alabama players in the transfer portal. I was like, whoa, holy crap. Did I miss something here? But it's basically a misleading headline because a lot of those guys, most of those guys entered the transfer portal before Saban, even retired. So it is a little bit of a misleading headline there, but there you have it. I guess let me know your reaction to this in the comments. Let me know what you think about the people leaving, if Kalen DeBoer will be successful at Alabama. So there you have it, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you like content like this, hit that subscribe button. We've been doing this show for over 3 years now. I've interviewed over 50 people that cover college football, but we're now starting to put a lot more kind of like solo stuff on tape. I will be putting more interviews when I have them on here, talking to people all over the country that cover college football. I also cover NFL, NBA, college basketball, different types of sports like that, different types of sports media stories too. So if you like any of that stuff, hit subscribe. We're just trying to get podcast to grow now, get the show to grow now. And the more people that subscribe, the more people that hit that like button really help us grow in the algorithm. So thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you next time.